G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm interviewing Ben Jansen from Vitura. He's based in Gold Coast, Australia. Thanks for your time today, Ben.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with how we know each other. So Chris Macklin, who we both know, is the founder of Six Tricks Distilling Co. in Mermaid Beach in the Gold Coast. And you recently came on, you and Sarah, as investors into the business. The distillery opens would have just opened when this goes live in June, production, and then in a couple of months, the cellar door opens in September. So that's how we know each other.
Yeah, it was opportune that we came to be, and it was one of my old lifeguard buddies from back in New Zealand who works in finance, who linked us together so that we could put some finance towards the Six Tricks Distillery. And I was really impressed with what Chris, yourself, and the team had put together. The financials, the forecasting, the plan, the branding was really quite unique, but also really well planned and well structured. So looking for an investment, you really have to go down into the nitty gritty, and what they presented there was exactly what we were looking for. So very pleased to be on with the Six Tricks Distilling Company. Yeah,
that's great. And yeah, I think you were the one with the most questions from the shareholders agreement and the financial modelling. So you're obviously astute, and this is not your first rodeo, as my daughter mistakenly called it when I told her one day it's my first rodeo. The next day she threw it back at me and saying it's not my first radio, Dad. So you've obviously done a fair bit of investing and quite a sophisticated investor as well.
Yeah, well, you learn by doing, I think. And over the years of working in the cannabis space and trying to grow it from a startup to where it is now as an ASX listed company that is profitable is a neat, unique thing to do again, but also something you have to be very vigilant about what you do. So you have to keep your finger on the pulse, especially if you're spending your own money at the beginning.
Yep, absolutely. Well, tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
So I'm originally a doctor from New Zealand trained. I have 3 fellowships. 2 from New Zealand and 1 in Australia. Moved across from New Zealand to Australia, live in the Gold Coast for better lifestyle after really working far too hard over there. And then we ended up going into the cannabis space and ended up working 60 to 80 hours a week again, which was not ideal at the time, but certainly we've got the benefit of being the finances coming on the far end of that. So when the legislation changed back in 2016, that was a federal change for cannabis to go from illicit to legal under certain circumstances, to be rescheduled to Schedule 4 for CBD and Schedule 8 for the THC, so a more restricted schedule there. I saw that on the news and absolutely want to get involved with it because the more you scratched under the surface, the more you could see that it worked as a medicine. It had worked overseas. And there had been many falsehoods put forward by different governments over the years about the detriment of cannabis in general. But in fact, as a medicine, it does absolutely work for some people. That's not to say that it works for everyone, but for some people it does work. So we started right back in 2016 with the first company called Burley Heads Cannabis, and that company actually is still running today and is arguably the largest wholesaler of medicinal cannabis in Australia. That was the first company that was started by 3 individuals, myself being one of them, myself and my wife being one entity. There was a lot of interest back in the day on medicinal cannabis. It still is. I still get people coming up to me these days and saying, I really want to get into medicinal cannabis. And I said, well, get a DeLorean. You need to go back about 5 years to really get in there to start getting into it. But these days there's a lot of companies you can invest in. I guess you can start up from a startup yourself and do your own small to medium-sized business. But we saw an opportunity there, and we analysed the market first of all. And all the big players were going to raise huge amounts of money, and they're going to grow the biggest greenhouses you've ever seen with so much cannabis, and we're going to give it to everyone. But there wasn't really an idea from these guys who are raising this capital how they actually do it, how they're actually going to put cannabis into a product and then into a patient. a lot of burning money at the gate, my father would say. And so we looked at the market and we said, well, we don't have a whole lot of capital, but we do have expertise in medicine. We looked at all the legislation that was coming out, and we decided that we were going to focus on the patient and work our way from the patient towards the wholesalers and the producers and manufacturers, whilst everyone else was going their own. Majority of people were. And we were very aware of the different entities that were going to control us. So from a federal level, the ODC, Office of Drug Control, the legislation there that we had to be aware of, and then more importantly, on the state level, we had to absolutely know what was going on a state level, and that meant that we were controlled by Queensland Health, and then the Medicines and Poisons Regulation Act as it is now. Of course, acts and regulations change every so often, so we had to keep our knowledge up to date. And we identified that we could move into the wholesaling space and the consulting space a lot more easier than any other ways. So we took a leap of faith and invested our own money, especially a lot of my mortgage, into Burley Heads Cannabis to produce a facility without ever knowing we were ever going to be able to sell one jar of cannabis product at all. And so it really was a leap of faith. And when we first wrote up the SOPs, the standard operating procedures, and handed these into Queensland Health for a review, they said, well, that's not how we do it. We want you to do it this way, different way. Take it back and redo it. So, well, no, we're right. This is the way it needs to be. It's going to work this way. And also that's sort of what your regulations say. And about two weeks or 4 weeks later, after we do these edits, they'd come back and say, oh, can you change it back? You were right the first time. Bit of learning on both sides of the camp, from the industry, but also from the regulators. And the regulators, not bad people. They just have to try and work out, especially in the new industry, what's going to work. And what I did learn with that is there is a bit of grey zone with regard to regulation, from the act to the regulation to then the implementation, and how the regulations are going to be viewed by the regulators. And over time, we worked closer and closer with the TGA, the Special Access Scheme team, Queensland Health, the different departments of health in different states, jurisdictions, to make sure that we're compliant the whole way. And it was all about compliance and compliance. And it was a slow grind for everyone for a couple of years. That money went out of the mortgage, and we paid the interest on the mortgage without really moving anything at all. I think our first import was 20 containers of 10 grams of cannabis. And that sat there for a long time, and we actually gifted that away in the end to a young patient who used it for, I believe it was from his seizure issues. And then we didn't do anything for a while before the regulators then got their structures in place so that they could deal with the amounts of applications that had come in to treat patients, but then also the different applications that would come in. So chronic pain was the most common, still is probably the best amount of evidence for it. But also from that, you've got epilepsy. You can treat different types of mental health potentially, etc., etc. So we waited around until they had essentially their computer portal ready to go, and then we had to work out how we were going to treat these patients, what our template would be, how we could be overly compliant, and we used the word APRA-proof in those days. And APRA is the Australian Health Practitioner Regulations Agency, essentially the medical board, the physio board, all combined to make sure that you're a good doctor or a good physio or a good nurse. And we knew that we were going to be tip of the sword, leading the way, doing new things. And so we had to make sure that we were safe for our patients and then compliant with the legislation as well. So there was a lot of work that we put in the background, doing the paperwork required, the processes, the consent form. It's interesting, I was on someone's website looking at a new clinic that popped up, and I went, oh, look, there's my consent form there.
Yep.
When you do it right, a lot of people would tend to copy it. And we sort of cracked the code with how we want to do it, put the patient first, and we grew a number of businesses out of that. So the next major business that we tied into the group was Cannabis Doctors Australia. We trained up a lot of doctors and nurses, brought them onto our books, also trained externally as well. Then on my kitchen bench, sat down and came up with the process of how to do the distribution and to the patient combined into one, and how we get that streamlined, decrease our overheads, make it more efficient. And then that's where we came up on the kitchen bench with CanView, which if you go to canview.com.au, is both patient facing but also pharmacist and doctor facing, where doctors can get educated. They can also see the products and prescribe them. Pharmacists can order them, and the patients can also get their education and have a look at different products as well. And again, arguably, it's the largest distributor. It's the front end of Burleigh Heads Cannabis.
So is that CanView with two N's, CANN view?
No, just one N. I'm a little bit different than most people that are in the medicinal cannabis space. I don't like cannabis green. I like corporate blue.
Yep.
Cannabis blue. And two N's in a cannabis word, I think you're overcooking it, really.
Yeah.
But that's probably a little bit of my Asperger's pushing through there. So we started with was 3 people initially. One of those 3.5, because my wife never gets any credit, but she was there at the beginning as well as a founder.
Yep.
And one of them decided that he didn't want to be involved right back in the beginning. And so we brought in some family members, and we grew it from a family business of 6 people, progressively up over the years. And once we cracked the code on how to treat the patients, how to get the products into the country, how to distribute it appropriately, how to get a pharmacist compliant, how to have other doctors and nurses prescribe and be compliant, then it started to ski slope up. And we went from having 6 people, family business, up to when I finally left the company, about 122 employees within the company.
That's phenomenal, Ben. In 7 years, from 3.5 to 122 team members.
Yeah, it really was just a really interesting time to be there, because every week we were essentially hiring for one person. We really brought on more people. We brought on marketing team. We brought on a distribution team. We had HR. We had a clinical team. The clinical team, big shout out to you guys if you're listening out there. They were a fantastic team. Loved everyone there, and we really worked well. And it just grew and grew. And we went from that initial import of 20 times 10 grams, so 200 grams, to importing kilos and then tons, working out how many tons per year we're importing of product.
Yep.
And eventually we got so big that we decided that just before that, we decided we were going to do a crowd fund before we started to really expand. We needed some capital to expand out our clinical model and our distribution model. So we did a crowd fund and took that money and grew further. And then we got to a point where we decided that we wanted to move out of the private space and merge with a listed company, which was another education piece in itself. And then we listed with Cronos Australia, which has subsequently changed the name to Vitura Health, and is the only cannabis company out there that has produced a dividend, the only profitable listed cannabis company in Australia, and arguably the leading cannabis company in Australia.
Yep, fantastic. And just to clarify the business model, the distribution. So were you shipping directly to consumers? Obviously, once they've got a prescription to be able to consume it, or
via pharmacies?
Via pharmacies, yeah.
Majority of what we pushed out, and then what is pushed out in general around the country.
Yep.
So doctors can supply directly as well, but that's a minority of what is supplied to patients in Australia.
Yep. Okay, great. And so 2016, you started. 2 things there. How old were you 7 years ago? I'll do the math for you. Keep it simple. And secondly, when did product first hit the market? You had a lot of that regulation you had to do. So kind of what the...
Yeah, 2016, end of 2016, I was 36.
Yep.
We had our first import as a proof of concept late 2017. from memory. And then it was 2018, a year later, before we saw the pivot from the TGA to allow prescription. So a prescription more easily. So the application process before that was via fax machine. Yeah, you might have to explain to your daughter what that is.
I will.
And my first application was the application form plus some evidence and journal form, which was about an inch thick, and I had to fax that through, and then the approval finally came through for that. And that was it's just simply for CBD, so non-psychoactive form of anti-inflammatory type CBD oil. This chap with low back pain, and in general, it doesn't work all that well for low back pain, but for him, it worked really well. And it worked so well, it cost way more than it would overseas, and it was such a hassle that he actually just took up a job in the US and moved there so he could get his medicine.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's 2018 when the tide shifted, and then it was 2019 when their sales and inputs started increase, and I think probably every quarter it's been exponentially going up for a lot of companies.
Yep. And also on the timeline, so when did you exit the business? Was that last year or the year before?
Yep, around about halfway through last year, or 3/4 through last year, and it was a bit of a silver lining in itself because I was working so many hours, pulling 80-hour weeks, to then switch that and not having much holiday at all, working so hard to then be able to spend some time with the family was great.
Yeah, well, that old adage is true for you as for most. Running your own business, you can work the hours you want when you want, so you get to choose when you work those 80 hours.
Yeah, yep. But yeah, when you're the boss, you've got to pick up all the pieces. So if there was any work left at the end of the day, you would pick it up. And right from the very beginning, it was a startup. So who was in there painting the walls at the very beginning, or sweeping the floor? There was my wife, there was I.
Yeah.
There was my cousin. We were working to build up the family business.
That's phenomenal. So you exited end of 2022. So really, it's a 6-year journey from 3.5 to 122 team members. That's phenomenal, Ben. Well done to you, Sarah, and the team.
Yeah. So just after we exited as well, the market cap touched on $500 million, which was a huge amount. I won't comment any further on that. But just to get that level as an ASX company or company in general, it's at that moment where you just go, wow. Our revenue had gone up significantly. I think this year we'll be running at the Vitura will be pushing out over 120 million revenue.
Right. Yep.
And maintaining quarter I think over the last quarter, the costs involved with that.
Yeah, fantastic. When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
There's been a few moments when you feel like you've succeeded. From a clinician, a doctor point of view, when you get a patient come back and they give you a phenomenal story, that's probably the most important one, from the clinician's heart. And we've had some amazing turnarounds. I've had kids with autism that mothers and the family just could not in any way control come back, and they are functional, not destroying your office, able to function at school, learning. I had patients with so much pain they just wanted to kill themselves. I had a patient who had she would turn up to the emergency department every single week to be sedated with heavy medication and actually anesthetics to take away her pain. Her pain level, she said, hadn't been under 7.5 in like 5 years. And she came back she started crying. She said, it's the first time I've had pain under five years. It's the first time I don't have to wear my glasses during the day. Thank you so much. That's you don't always have to go to work for money. And I used to say this to my staff, you don't have to work for money, love, or fun. And if you don't have a balance of those things, why are you even turning up? On a financial side, when did we feel that we'd made it? Well, it wasn't when I got my mortgage, what I'd taken out my mortgage and put on the business back, because it only just paid that back. It didn't pay back the interest. But everyone, their dream is to own their own home. And when we've done that and we'd paid off the mortgage because we'd done well and got a payout, that's the moment where I really gave my wife a big kiss and a cuddle when we had some champagne and said, wow, we've done it.
That's great. And what does success look like to you?
It's different now. But I'm a little bit on the spectrum, on the Asperger's spectrum. Relatively driven sort of person. So success for me is usually total victory of some description. I think we've done really well in the medicinal cannabis space. We haven't achieved, or I haven't achieved everything that I want to yet in that or in life. So I have a number of goals. I really would like to look further and deeper down into getting some products that are manufactured and pushed into market. And certainly that's where some of our investments lie. And that's where some of our work will be in the future. My wife is a scientist and a research scientist, so we'll be looking at that in the near future as well. But there's things outside of just working in medicine. I think my next goal for the next 2 weeks is to go chase some tornadoes in the USA.
Oh, great. That's different.
Everyone's got their fetish, don't they?
Yes. Well, back on you being driven, I do remember when we were talking with you about potentially investing, you and Sarah, in the business, and Chris, the founder of Six Tricks Distilling, rum and whiskey distillery in the Gold Coast, has got this exit target at certain millions of dollars he doesn't want to exit for. And during our due diligence and answering your questions, etc., you said, "Fuck that! I think we should double that figure." And I said to Ben,
I won't swear on radio though.
Oh, I'm allowed to swear though. I said to Chris and Tegan after the meeting, I said, this is exactly the kind of investor we need, not just investing, but also sitting on the board, which you are sitting on the board with myself and Chris and a few others. So yeah, that I did chuckle at that, but it's exactly what we need. I mean, Chris's target is already ambitious and you've just doubled it.
Yeah, you have to be realistic, but if you aim for the sky, you hit the trees. If you aim for the stars, you hit the sky.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was Leo Burnett that said, if you aim for the stars, at least you won't end up with a handful of mud, something like that. Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Know your craft, know your legislation, know your space, really. And we knew the legislation and all the act. We read the act, we read the regulation, and then we'd go and hammer the regulators and take them to task and say, well, no, this is this and this. And so we really were in their face, trying to push the tip of that sword further. And the goalpost changed every few months. It was cannabis is legal. Okay, now it's legal, but only for this. Okay, now moved a little bit further. Progressively, things have changed in that space, and prescribing has become more and more easy for doctors.
Yep. And anything else on funding the business? You said that you leaned on the mortgage, the house. Obviously, you did crowdfund, then you exited to an ASX listed company. Any other investors along the way, bridging those funding gaps?
Yeah, so when you're funding it by yourself, you tend to be a little bit more frugal, depending on how much money you've got to throw at things. That was identified at the beginning. We didn't have a lot of money, so we decided that we had to be efficient on what we spent it on. And then even after that, when we did a crowdfund, it still was people that had invested that we knew, or they were our shareholders. So we were aware that we shouldn't be giving away money here willy-nilly. We shouldn't be overpaying ourselves. We should be very focused on delivering to our shareholders. You look at some of these companies out there on the ASX, and if you're not running it correctly, you just end up putting your hand out for more money again and again. What do you call a business that doesn't make money?
A hobby.
You should be trading. You're insolvent. So you go into business to make money. MLF, money, love, and fun. My father used to do a talk to junior doctors, and if you get up there, he'd pretty much just have one slide, and he'd go, right, so how do you make money, be a successful doctor? Spend less than you earn.
Pretty simple.
Do the simple things well.
Yeah. And on the crowdfund, so what was the maximum you were hoping to raise, and what did you end up raising in that crowdfund?
From memory, it was just under 2 million. Oh, geez, my memory's going now. And it was helpful because it really got a name out there, brought the community into it. It was the first ever crowdfund for medicinal cannabis in Australia, and it was successful in what we did there, and it really supercharged what we're doing, because then we could really throw some money at different departments, and then from that generate revenue. And that's the key thing, is to generate revenue rather than just spend it because you think that you should be spending it. You got to put that money in there, and you're going to get it back in 2 or 3 times.
Yep. So you raised the maximum you're going for?
Just under.
Yeah. Yep. And what year did you do that crowdfund? Was
it? Oh, that was 2019, I believe.
Yep. Great. That's a great result.
And for anyone looking at that, you do need to look into that. It does come with cost to do it. Yeah, everyone takes a clip along the way. Everyone wants a clip. There's benefits to doing it in a crowdfund situation, but there's also potential risks as well, especially if you don't get it. You're not the first one there. It doesn't look so good. And there's other options around the place. If you can put together a fantastic deck and you bring it through to private investors like me, I'll certainly look at it, especially if you've got good financials and forecast.
Yep, absolutely. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
Yeah, I think there's some gaps out there, and that's around knowing your craft, knowing your area, knowing your space. And there's certain things that I think that haven't been done and could be done. And so yes, I would. Doing other businesses that I start up now, because I've got spare time, is either for fun, or there's a financial aspect to it. There always has to be a financial, money, love, and fun. So anything that I want to invest in or get into, I need to know the space. And thank you, Troy, for the recent tour down in Tasmania. It was very enlightening. I'd recommend it to anyone who wants to go on Troy's tours down there.
That was great fun for the audience. It was we visited 12 distilleries, 3 breweries, 3 wineries in 4 days in a minivan. There's yourself, Tegan, Chris, the founder, obviously, and 6 other investors, and a 4-month-old baby, the most well-behaved baby I've ever met, Harvey. So 10 and a half of us on a 12-seater bus zipping around Tasmania. It was a lot of fun, long days and nights.
Yeah, it was very surprising to get down there and just learn so much. I really thought I knew a lot, but then you get put in your space when you realize with someone as expert as yourself in the industry there, it was just fantastic. Get in the back door and then go around and get real opinions from the back door. It was great.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Part of knowing your space, isn't it?
Yeah. Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Well, I was the front man, essentially, being the doctor at the front there, and that was quite stressful for myself and for my family. There was a lot of hours that I had to put into looking after patients, looking after staff, looking after the business. So there was a lot of stress. And because I was the front man, of course, there was a lot of industry envy, I guess you'd call it. And I do know that there are some people within the industry who have put up vexatious complaints against me to certain regulators. And if you're listening to this podcast, I know who you are. See you next.
Yeah. Yes. What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Wow. Okay. For myself, wasn't really around the financial side or the numbers, because I was always really good at numbers and accounting. I guess it was more around some of the interpersonal skills for a lot of it. And because of my traits, I tend to be overly trusting in a lot of people. And when you start to get up into the big corporate world, there's a lot of people in the industry who would wish you harm but smile straight in your face, as I alluded to just before. So you do have to be cautious with what you do, the bigger you get.
Yeah, totally agree. Been there, seen that. What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
The one thing that I didn't like about the rapid growth was just the hours that you had to put in. that was just the biggest strain. And I came from working in Auckland, where I was working far too much as a doctor there. I'd taken 1 day off in 2 months. And at that point, I said I'd had enough. Let's move to the Gold Coast. I'm done. Can't do anymore. And then I ended up doing the same sort of thing. So you got to put in the time to make it work. You got to, you just got to do it. But that's at a cost benefit analysis against your family life and your own time.
Yeah. What do you love most about growing a small business?
It was just amazing that we could bring so many great people on throughout the business. We had so many lovely people, especially when we're starting up, and our staff had invested in the company through crowdfund. We actually gave some shares up to the staff as well, and to go along that journey with them. And then for our crowdfunding shareholders, being able to engage with them and bring them along the journey, and make a benefit to their life financially. I think the crowdfunders, when we ended up going from crowdfunding to listing, they got a 19 times increase on their money.
Wow. That would have been one of the most successful crowdfund exits in Australia.
Yeah. And I think if they had then held on, that would have taken it to another 3 times over that post.
Jeez. Wow. Geez, that's amazing.
Yeah. So there's some people in there that in the crowdfund that held on, and I think they sold at $1 on the share market when they'd come in at much below that. Yeah. So
wow, that's phenomenal. What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
I guess now that we've got a lot more capital behind what we can do, it feeds into certain aspects of my personality of get it done. So now moving forward with the businesses that we're working with now, I'm just, let's get it done. We can throw a bit more money at them. If you've got enough money, you can cut down your time. If you don't, you're going to need to put in the time.
The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
A routine around knowing your space, because things can change. Don't ever set and forget. Things will change depending on your space. And in medicine and health, it'll change pretty rapidly. Someone will come in and disturb the market, and you still have to be agile enough to move around and develop with it.
Find it hard to define a clear strategy, then communicate it and execute it alongside the rest of your team? Or you currently don't work a simple quarterly strategic plan to boost your team's performance? Our Business Growth Formula online course is perfect for small business owners with 5 to 30 team members wanting to grow. We share the mindsets, habits and tools to be a legendary leader in your business. growasmallbusiness.com.
Perfect question for you, growing from 3.5 people to 122. Can you talk how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Yeah. Well, there's always mistakes when you're going along, and there's never always the continuously picking up the right people and the right fit, and personalities will clash. And the more people get, the more on board, the more issues we had with people's personalities interacting, and this person said that, and that I don't like working with this person. That was probably the biggest learnings with trying to manage the HR side of things. It was great within certain teams. They really got along well, but I think there was some people out there that didn't get along with everyone. And over time, you eventually get the right people for the business. If there's someone there that's passionate about their industry and they fall into the money, love and fun model for us, it worked really well.
Yeah.
I can speak really highly of our clinical team. We did a bit of socializing together. We were very direct and clear and compassionate to each other. We supported each other, and that was key to really running a good department.
Yeah. No, on people clashing and working together, etc. I love that text and saying the definition of conflict is 2 people in the same county
That's right.
Yeah.
But overall, you know, the business as a whole just was fantastic. I mean, by and large, everyone got along, but you're just never going to please everyone. That's just the nature of the world, isn't it?
Yeah. What are some of the things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Sustainable and kick-ass culture. Great Christmas parties.
Yeah.
2 Christmases. Any excuse to have fun. You got to do your job well. End of the day, you turn around and have a bit of a laugh, and have fun with your fellow employees. You got to get on with it. Get on with your job. Get on with having fun.
Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
I didn't for a long time. That was an issue. I think you can ask my wife pretty directly, and she'll say he was working on far too many hours, and now that he's not working in the business, it's really lovely that I have time to look after the kids at night, drop them off at school, do their lunches, cook dinner, and that sort of thing. You can't burn the candle at both ends forever. So getting that work-life balance is really key. When I was at the very beginning of medical school, they have an initiation camp called a freshers camp, and we turned up to that, and there was a registrar, so a middle-level junior doctor, who got up in front of us and said, when you get to my age, you're going to need to get work-life balance right. And he's saying this to a group of brand new medical students chomping at the bit, all slightly Asperger, really, really driven, ready to go, worked really hard to get to medical school. And I turned to my ex-wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, and said to her, what a pussy. And she goes, yeah, what a pussy. and then fast forward about 6 years later, and I was like, oh, no, I was talking about, this is yep. I know what you're talking about now after working in the hospital, yeah. And back in those days in New Zealand, you'd do 60 hours, you wouldn't get paid any overtime.
And also you'd have a shitload of study on top of that as well. You got 3 fellowships.
Yeah, you got to do the learning as well, yeah.
And so out of interest, how did you go? So you pretty much exited operationally from the business about a year ago, not even a year. How'd you go decompressing? Did you still feel the urge to be working that hard, or was it hard to, let go?
I went to Disney World.
Hopefully not on your own. You did take the family.
Yeah, I hadn't had a holiday for 5 years, really proper holiday. So my way to cope with that was to go and chase some tornadoes and meet the family down in Florida and take some time off, which I really needed. But you're right, it took literally 2.5, 3 months before I could get my mind out of that mindset of just drilling yourself back to back.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to other people in a similar sort of situation, exiting from being in high stress roles, and it does take a number of months to turn it around and get that balance right. And hopefully I'm going to get the balance right moving forward with the next ventures.
Yeah, great. Bit of a stupid question asking a doctor how much professional development you've invested in yourself, but let's put aside the medical training. But any professional development there, more on the business side? Did you swat up much on, how to run a business, manage people, etc., marketing?
Yeah, every time I came across a problem, you had to read up on it. From a medical point of view, obviously there's ongoing continued medical education, and I've got enough letters after my name now that I don't really want anymore. That being said, I will do the directorship course because I haven't done that yet. I'm getting a little bit dubious about how much I'm going to learn from that, considering how much of these director type roles that I've been going into. But again, I flipped back to the legislation. So I haven't read the Corporations Act front to back, but I've read the majority of it because we had to for different situations. So the amount of time invested into learning as we go along,
a lot. Have you had mentors or coaches along the way?
I've had within the family some mentors. My grandfather was a driven person, lawyer by trade, who then went into politics and was the mayor of Hamilton in New Zealand for over a decade. And I learned a lot by standing next to him and seeing how he worked. And also my grandmother as well, who worked for the UN. Within my family, my father and uncle both are doctors and worked in that medical regulator type space. Outside of that, I haven't brought on any official mentors on a full-time or part-time role, but I'm not afraid to walk up to someone and ask them and be upfront with them. You know, why is it like this? How come it's like this? What do I need to read to know this?
Yeah.
And you got to be direct to get what you want a lot of the time.
And you obviously had a board of directors when you're at the ASX company, but before that, did you have a board before you got merged with the ASX listed company?
Yeah, right back in the beginning, there was the board of three. And there's obviously teething struggles when you get a startup going and different opinions on how things should go, especially when there's no cash flow. And over time, that expanded out, obviously. And then when we got to that ASX listed company, well, that's a different kettle of fish. And then you got to work absolutely 100% within the legislations, but then also with the ASX guidelines as well. And having a skilled person in there to give you advice at the time. So we're getting good legal advice, we're getting good advice from people who knew how to run a listed company, and what we required was really key.
Yep. You're one of the few that we've had on that's exited a business. Have you got any advice for the audience considering exiting one day?
Yeah, go to Disney World. Universal Studios is quite good, and then drive down Florida to the very
I meant before that, highway. The actual exiting, prepare.
The actual exiting. The actual exiting. Have a plan would be the best way to do it. I think it's probably the best option is to at least have a plan of where you want to get to. The goal to pay off your mortgage was a key thing, and once you've done that, you know, how much money does one man need? 6 foot wide, about 6 foot deep.
Yep. All right, Ben, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Initially, it was capital and then personalities, I think, because there's always going to be, if there's not a clear leader or defined leadership, there can be different ways that people want to pull the company where they think it should be. And that can be just cause a lot of stress with people and interpersonal relationships. And then there isn't the capital there to do it. Well, that's going to compound things.
Yeah, definitely. Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
I'm a bit of a geek, so I just like reading the legislation, the acts, and seeing how they've written it up and going, well, okay, well, that's an interesting way to do it. We changed in this one.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
For professional development, here and there, what people push through. But my interests are out usually along the medical lines or science lines. So for science, I'll go EBS space-time because I'm interested in particle physics and quantum mechanics. From a business point of view, I can't recommend any particular channel except for Troy's channel.
Thanks. One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
Best tool grow a small business. It's you have to use some sort of forecasting software, or at least an Excel. I love a good Excel. In fact, right back when we first started out, we started consulting patients and then estimating how much a patient would use or require, what our retention rate would be, what our margin would be. Wrote that up and did a forecast simply on an Excel, and looked at that again about a year ago, and I was within $10,000.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so just a simple Excel. I love a good Excel, love a good equation. You can put it in there, and we did that for every single company and process that that we were pushing through, was just to map it out and then put it into an Excel and then stress it and see what was going to happen. But what happens if this? What happens if your margin drops? What are we going to do there? Where's our safety on this? How can we push the margin up on this? Or what's going to happen? How can we predict this? How can we prevent an issue with cash flow?
Yep. Finally, my favorite question. What would you tell yourself on day one of starting out 7 years ago?
A lot of things. It's that DeLorean, isn't it?
Yep.
If you go back in time and change things, and it's a bit like the butterfly effect. You change so many things along the way. I guess there's some good things, there's some bad things along the way, there's some stressful things. In the end, we got the outcome that we wanted, and to have such a fantastic company that grew so well, benefited so many patients, benefited so many shareholders. That's great, and being part of that, I don't think I would change that, because 2016 cannabis was illegal. Now here we are. We're moving 2023, and the world has changed. We are giving medicinal cannabis to people. We're changing lives for the better. And look out the next 5 years as different products come to market. And there's probably going to be some pivots when it comes to medicinal cannabis and the other potential psychedelics and other treatments out there.
Yep. Fantastic. Thanks very much for your time today, Ben. I've really enjoyed our chat. I'm sure we could go for another hour or so, but we'll save that for the distillery opening in September. Have a beer and a spirit there. Congratulations to you and Sarah and the team. Phenomenal growth over 6-7 years, 3.5 people to 122, and then merging with an ASX listed company. That's an amazing growth story and journey. So congratulations.
Thank you very much, Troy. Thank you for having me on here, and thank you for everyone who tuned in to listen.
We're getting some great iTunes reviews. For those listening, please pop over to your podcast app and leave us a review.